stood at the window of her family's estate and looked out at the endless city lights of her. Ships moved across the purple sky like glowing insects. Below her, servants prepared for another grand party. Music drifted up from the ballroom where hundreds of guests would soon arrive to celebrate her birthday. She was turning 120 years old, still young by standards, and her family wanted everyone to know how important she was. She did not feel important, she felt empty. Belonged to the wealthiest trade dynasty in the consortium. Her family controlled shipping lanes across 3 galactic sectors. They owned space stations and mining operations and luxury resorts on a dozen worlds. The name opened every door and commanded instant respect wherever it was spoken, but had started to wonder if that respect was real. She turned away from the window and walked to her dressing room where 3 attendants waited to help her prepare for the party. They smiled and bowed and told her how beautiful she looked. They said the guests were so excited to see her. They said this would be the most wonderful celebration the sector had ever seen. Thanked them politely and let them do their work. They styled her silver hair and painted delicate patterns on her pale blue skin. They dressed her in a gown worth more than most families earned in a lifetime. When they finished, she looked like a princess from an old story. She walked down to the ballroom where the guests had already gathered. They turned to watch her descend the grand staircase. They applauded. They called out her name with voices full of admiration. Smiled and greeted them one by one. There was Merchant Prime, who controlled the fuel trade in the outer systems. There was Ambassador Vina, who represented the consortium on 12 different worlds. There was Young Lord, who had been trying to win her attention for nearly a decade. They all said the same things. They told her she was brilliant. They told her she was beautiful. They told her that her family was the backbone of galactic commerce and that she would surely lead them to even greater glory. Lord brought her a drink and stood close beside her. He spoke about his admiration for her character and her wisdom. He said he had never met anyone quite like her. His eyes were warm and his words were sweet. But noticed how his gaze flickered to her family crest on the wall behind her. She noticed how he mentioned his own family's struggling shipping business 3 times in 5 minutes. She noticed how his warmth seemed practiced rather than genuine. She excused herself and moved through the crowd. Everywhere she went, the pattern repeated. People smiled too wide. They laughed too loud at her simple comments. They agreed with everything she said even when she deliberately said foolish things to test them. No one disagreed with her. No one challenged her. No one treated her like a normal person who could be wrong or make mistakes. Near the end of the night, she overheard 2 guests talking in a quiet corner. They did not know she was listening. One said that seemed pleasant enough but rather dull. The other agreed and said it did not matter because her family's fortune made her the most desirable match in 3 sectors. They laughed about how easy it was to flatter her and how simple it would be to gain her favor. Walked away before they could see her. She climbed back to her room and stood again at the window. The party continued below without her. No one seemed to notice she was gone. She made a decision that night. She would leave everything behind. She would travel to a distant world where no one knew the name. She would disguise herself as a poor refugee with nothing to offer anyone, and she would wait to see if a single creature in the entire galaxy would show her genuine kindness. She chose Earth. Humans were relatively new to galactic society. They had only made contact with other species about 60 years ago. Their world was not wealthy by galactic standards. Their technology was still developing. But travelers said humans were an interesting species, unpredictable and emotional, and sometimes surprisingly generous. Wanted to see for herself. She spent weeks preparing in secret. She obtained simple worn clothing from a charity collection meant for refugees. She created a false identity as a woman who had fled a border conflict in the outer territories. Such conflicts were common enough that no one would question her story. She chose the human city of Chicago as her destination. It had a large transit station where many species passed through daily. Aliens were common enough there that she would not stand out, but the population was still mostly human. It seemed like the perfect place to conduct her experiment. On the night she left, she took nothing but her disguise and a small emergency beacon hidden in her belt. If things became truly dangerous, she could activate it and her family's security forces would retrieve her within hours. But she hoped she would not need it. She traveled on a common transport ship, sitting in the cheapest section with workers and migrants and small traders. No one looked at her twice. No one offered her special treatment. It was strange and uncomfortable and somehow refreshing. When she arrived at the Chicago transit station, she stepped off the ship and looked around at the crowded halls. Humans hurried past in all directions. Aliens from a dozen worlds moved among them. Vendors called out from their stalls. Children pointed at passing ships through the great windows. Found a bench near a food vendor and sat down. She arranged her worn clothing around her and tried to look as helpless as possible. She had no money. She had no friends. She had nothing to offer anyone who might stop to help her. She waited. The first hour passed. People walked by without looking at her. A security officer glanced her way but moved on when she stayed quiet. A cleaning robot hummed past and worked around her as if she were just another piece of furniture. The second hour passed. Felt hunger for the first time in her life. On her, she had never wanted for anything. Food appeared whenever she desired it. Here, the smell of cooking from the nearby vendor made her stomach ache. She watched a wealthy merchant buy an expensive meal and throw half of it away when he finished. She watched families hurry past with bags full of purchases. She watched lovers share treats and laugh together. No one looked at her. As night fell over the station, pulled her thin jacket around her shoulders. The temperature had dropped and she had nowhere warm to sleep. She curled up on the bench and closed her eyes. For the first time, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But she was determined to continue. She would give the galaxy a fair chance to prove that kindness could exist without reward. She would wait as long as it took. 5 days had passed since arrived at the Chicago transit station. 5 days of sitting on benches and sleeping in corners and watching the endless flow of travelers pass her by. 5 days of hunger and cold, and something she had never experienced before in her entire privileged life. Invisibility. On her could not walk 10 steps without someone rushing to assist her. Servants appeared at her elbow before she even knew she needed something. Merchants fell over themselves to show her their finest goods. Strangers smiled and bowed and made way for her wherever she went. Here she was nothing, less than nothing. She was an obstacle that people stepped around without acknowledgement. She was a smudge on the polished floors that cleaning robots worked to remove. She was invisible. At first she thought perhaps people simply did not see her, but she soon realized the truth was worse. They saw her perfectly well. They simply chose not to care. She watched the patterns of the station and learned its hidden rules. Wealthy travelers moved through expedited security lanes, while common workers waited in long lines. Business owners shouted at employees who made small mistakes but smiled sweetly at customers who spent large sums. Security officers watched the poor and the desperate with suspicious eyes, but nodded respectfully to anyone wearing expensive clothing. The aliens were no better than the humans. A group of traders walked past her bench each morning. They were a species known for their spiritual traditions and their talk of universal compassion, but they never once glanced at the hungry woman sitting alone in the cold. A merchant named finally noticed her on the 3rd day. He ran a stall selling luxury fabrics from distant worlds. He watched her sitting near his display and seemed to recognize her species. He approached her and looked her up and down with calculating eyes. He said he needed someone to clean his displays and organize his stock. The work was simple, but the hours were long. He offered to pay her a small amount each day. Accepted gratefully, she thought perhaps she had finally found someone willing to help. She was wrong. Worked her for 12 hours straight. He criticized everything she did. He made her reorganize the same shelves 3 times because the colors were not arranged to his satisfaction. He snapped at her when customers were watching but smiled when they looked away. At the end of the day, she approached him for payment. He looked at her with cold amusement and handed her a handful of small coins. It was less than a quarter of what he had promised. Protested. She said they had agreed on a fair wage. She said she had worked hard and deserved what she was owed. Laughed. He asked who would believe her word against his. He reminded her that she was a refugee with no documentation and no friends and no one to speak for her. He said if she complained to security, he would tell them she had tried to steal from his stall. He said they would believe him because he was a respected merchant and she was nobody. Took the coins and walked away. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She had known intellectually that the galaxy could be cruel. She had read about poverty and exploitation and the suffering of those without power. But reading about such things and experiencing them were entirely different. She bought a small meal with her coins and ate it slowly on her bench. It was barely enough to stop her hunger, but it was all she could afford. She saved a few coins for the next day because she did not know when she would find more work. That night, a group of young humans walked past her corner. They were dressed in expensive clothes and laughing loudly. One of them pointed at her and made a joke about her appearance. The others laughed harder. They did not see her as a person. They saw her as entertainment. Curled up smaller and waited for them to pass. On the 4th day, she tried to find more work. She approached several stalls and offered her services. Some ignored her completely. Some told her they had no need for help. One alien, a large creature with 4 arms and a face, told her to get away from his merchandise before he called security. She sat back down on her bench and watched the crowds flow past. Thousands of beings moved through the station every hour. Surely one of them would stop. Surely one of them would see a hungry woman alone and feel moved to help. But no one stopped. A human child dropped a piece of fruit near her bench. Before could reach for it, the child's mother swooped in and snatched it away. She looked at with disgust and pulled her child closer as if protecting it from danger. They hurried away without a word. On the 5th night, found a bench in a quieter section of the station. The main halls were too bright and too loud for sleep. Here, in a forgotten corner near the cargo bays, she could at least rest without being disturbed. She sat alone in the dim light and thought about her life. She thought about the parties and the praise and the endless flattery she had left behind. She thought about Lord and his calculated warmth. She thought about the guests who called her brilliant and beautiful while scheming to use her fortune. At least those people had pretended to care. Here, no one bothered with pretense. They simply did not care at all. She reached down and touched the emergency beacon hidden in her belt. One press of the button and everything would end. Her family's security forces would come for her. She would return to her comfortable life on her comfortable world with her comfortable lies. But something stopped her. She had come here looking for proof that genuine kindness existed. 5 days was not enough time to search an entire galaxy. Perhaps kindness was rare. Perhaps it was hidden. Perhaps she simply had not found it yet. She decided to give herself one more day. If nothing changed by tomorrow night, she would activate the beacon and admit defeat. She would accept that kindness without expectation of reward did not exist anywhere in the universe. She leaned back against the cold bench and closed her eyes. She was hungry and tired and lonelier than she had ever been in her life, but she refused to give up yet. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow something would change. She did not know how right she was. The morning light filtered through the great windows of the transit station and touched face. She opened her eyes slowly and sat up on the hard bench. Her body ached from another night of uncomfortable sleep. Her stomach was empty and her throat was dry. She looked around at the quiet cargo bay section where she had made her temporary home. A few workers moved in the distance, preparing for the day's shipments. Cleaning robots hummed along the floors. The main station was waking up. Stretched her stiff limbs and prepared for another day of waiting. She had decided to give the galaxy one more chance. If no one showed her kindness today, she would activate her beacon and return to her old life. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up. A human woman walked toward the bench. She was not young but not old either, perhaps in her middle years by human standards. She wore simple work clothes that had been washed many times. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical style. Her face looked tired but her eyes were warm. The woman sat down on the other end of the bench. She did not speak at first. She simply sat and looked out at the cargo bays where ships were beginning to move. Watched her carefully. She had learned to be cautious of strangers. The merchant had taught her that apparent kindness often hid selfish motives. The woman opened a small bag she carried and pulled out something wrapped in paper. It was a sandwich, simple bread with vegetables and some kind of protein filling. She unwrapped it carefully and then did something that made her heart stop. She tore the sandwich in half. She held one portion out toward without looking at her directly. Her gesture was casual, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Stared at the offered food. She did not understand what was happening. The woman finally turned to look at her. She said simply that looked hungry. She said she should eat something. Her voice was gentle but not pitying. Her eyes held no calculation, no expectation, no hidden agenda. She was simply a tired woman offering half her lunch to a stranger. Did not move. She could not move. In 5 days of hunger and cold and invisibility, no one had offered her anything without wanting something in return. This made no sense. There had to be a catch. The woman seemed to understand her hesitation. She placed the food on the bench between them and returned to eating her own half. She did not pressure to accept. She did not demand gratitude or explanation. She simply ate her breakfast and looked out at the ships. Slowly reached for the food. Her hands were trembling. She picked up the sandwich and took a small bite. It was simple food. The bread was slightly stale. The vegetables were basic. The protein was something she did not recognize. But it tasted better than any feast she had ever eaten in the grand halls of her family's estate. They sat together in silence and ate, kept glancing at the woman, waiting for the moment when she would reveal her true intentions. But the moment never came. The woman finished her portion, folded the paper neatly, and tucked it back into her bag. She stood up and brushed crumbs from her clothes. She looked at and smiled. It was a real smile, tired but genuine. She said her name was Lucy. Lucy Grant. She said she worked in the cargo bays, loading and unloading freight ships during the night shifts. She said she came to this bench sometimes to eat her breakfast before heading home to sleep. Found her voice. She said her name was and thanked Lucy for the food. She asked why Lucy had helped her when they had never met before. Lucy shrugged. She said it was nothing special. She said looked like she needed a meal. She said that was reason enough. Before could respond, Lucy said something else. She said if was still here tomorrow morning, she would bring extra food. Then she turned and walked away toward the station's exit, disappearing into the flow of workers heading home after their shifts. Sat alone on the bench and stared at the spot where Lucy had been sitting. She tried to process what had just happened. A stranger had given her food. A stranger who clearly had little herself, judging by her worn clothes and simple lunch. A stranger who asked nothing in return and expected nothing in response. Had traveled across the galaxy searching for proof that genuine kindness existed. She had been ignored and exploited and humiliated. She had begun to believe that every creature was motivated purely by self-interest. And then Lucy Grant sat down on a bench and shared her sandwich. Thought about all the people who had flattered her on her. Merchants who praised her taste while trying to sell her expensive goods. Nobles who admired her wisdom while seeking connections to her family's power. Suitors who declared their love while calculating her fortune. None of them had ever given her anything real. They had only taken. Lucy had given something real. Half of her breakfast, offered freely to a stranger who could never repay her. It was such a small thing, and yet it felt enormous. Decided she would be on this bench tomorrow morning. She wanted to see if Lucy would keep her word. She wanted to understand this strange human woman who helped strangers for no reason. She spent the rest of the day in a kind of daze. She sat on her bench and watched the crowds pass. The station looked different somehow. The faces seemed less hostile. The noise seemed less overwhelming. She was still hungry and tired and alone. Nothing had really changed, but everything felt different because one person had shown her kindness without wanting anything back. That night slept better than she had since arriving on Earth. She dreamed of home, but the dream was not pleasant. She dreamed of empty ballrooms and hollow laughter and eyes that calculated her worth in credits. When she woke the next morning, she found herself watching the path from the cargo bays. She was waiting for Lucy. And Lucy came. Lucy kept her word. She came to the bench the next morning with 2 sandwiches wrapped in paper. She sat down beside and handed one to her without ceremony. They ate together in comfortable silence while watching the cargo ships move through the bay windows. This became their routine. Every morning after her night shift, Lucy would bring food for both of them. Sometimes it was sandwiches. Sometimes it was fruit or small pastries from a vendor who gave her a discount. Sometimes it was soup in a container that she had made herself at home. At first said little. She was not used to simple conversation without hidden motives. On her, every word carried weight and every exchange had purpose. People did not talk just to talk. They talked to gain advantage. But Lucy talked freely about anything and everything. She talked about her work and the interesting cargo she had seen pass through the station. She talked about the weather and the news and the strange customs of the different alien species she encountered. Gradually began to talk too. She stuck to her cover story about being a refugee from a border conflict. She said she had lost everything and had nowhere to go. She said she was trying to find work but no one would hire her. Lucy listened without judgment. She did not pry for details or question the gaps in story. She simply accepted what told her and offered sympathy where it seemed needed. One morning, asked Lucy about her own life. She wanted to understand who this woman was and why she behaved so differently from everyone else. Lucy smiled and said there was not much to tell. She had grown up in a small town in Minnesota, a place had never heard of. Her parents had worked hard their whole lives but never had much money. Her father had been a factory worker. Her mother had cleaned houses for wealthier families. Lucy said she had come to the transit station 10 years ago looking for better opportunities. The work was hard, but it paid well enough. She rented a small apartment near the station and lived simply. She sent money home to her younger brother who was studying to become a teacher. Asked if Lucy ever felt lonely living so far from her family. Lucy thought about this for a moment. She said yes, sometimes. She said she missed her brother and her old friends and the quiet streets of her, but she said the work was important. Her brother needed help paying for school. This was how she could provide that help. Asked why Lucy had started helping her. She asked why Lucy shared her food with a stranger when she obviously had little to spare. Lucy's answer was simple. She said that someone had helped her once when she had nothing. Years ago, when she first arrived at the station, she had lost her bag with all her money and documents. She had been alone and scared and did not know what to do. A stranger had bought her a meal and helped her find the office where she could report her loss. That stranger had asked nothing in return. Lucy said that kindness was like that. You received it and then you passed it on. It was just what people did, or at least what they should do. Thought about this for a long time after Lucy left that morning. The days turned into weeks. Lucy continued to bring food and companionship, but she did more than that. She helped find temporary shelter through a human charity organization that assisted refugees and displaced persons. The shelter was simple, just a bed in a shared room, but it was warm and safe. No longer had to sleep on benches in cold corners. Lucy introduced her to other workers at the station who treated her with casual friendliness. There was Henry, a large man who operated loading equipment and told terrible jokes. There was Maria, a young woman who worked in the customs office and always had candy in her pockets. There was Old, who had worked at the station for 30 years and knew everyone's secrets but never shared them. They accepted as one of their own. They did not care that she was an alien or that she had nothing. They included her in their conversations and their lunch breaks and their small celebrations. Watched Lucy move through her days and began to understand something important. Kindness was not a single act for Lucy. It was not something she did occasionally when the mood struck her. It was simply how she existed in the world. She watched Lucy work double shifts to cover for a whose child was sick. She watched Lucy give directions to lost travelers who interrupted her meal. She watched Lucy help an elderly alien carry heavy bags to a transport ship. She watched Lucy smile at children who stared at her curiously and wave at security guards who looked bored at their posts. Every interaction was an opportunity for small kindnesses. Every person was worthy of basic decency and respect. This was Lucy's philosophy, though she never stated it so directly. She simply lived it. Had spent her entire life surrounded by people who calculated the value of every action. On her, nothing was free. Every gift came with strings attached. Every favor created an obligation. Relationships were transactions measured in credits and influence. Lucy operated by different rules entirely. She gave freely without keeping score. She helped without expecting repayment. She treated everyone with the same warm respect regardless of their status or wealth or species. For the first time in her life, experienced genuine friendship. She looked forward to their morning conversations. She felt happy when Lucy laughed at something she said. She worried when Lucy seemed tired or stressed. And alongside that friendship grew something else. Guilt was lying to the only true friend she had ever had. She was pretending to be someone she was not. Every day the deception continued, the weight of it grew heavier. She knew she would have to tell Lucy the truth. She just did not know how. Could not sleep. She lay in her bed at the shelter and stared at the ceiling while other refugees snored softly around her. The guilt had grown too heavy to carry. She had to tell Lucy the truth. She was terrified. Lucy was the only real friend she had ever known. Their morning conversations had become the part of her days. The thought of losing that friendship made her chest ache in a way she did not fully understand. But she could not continue lying. Every kind word Lucy spoke to her felt like a wound. Every meal they shared felt like a theft. Lucy deserved to know who she was really helping. The next evening, waited at their usual bench. She had asked Lucy to meet her after her shift ended. She had said she needed to talk about something important. Lucy had agreed without asking questions. Rehearsed what she would say while she waited. She tried to find words that would explain her deception without making it worse. She failed every time. Lucy arrived looking tired but curious. She sat down on the bench and asked what was wrong. She said had sounded serious in her message. Took a deep breath. She said she had something to confess. She said Lucy might hate her after hearing it. She said she would understand if Lucy never wanted to see her again. Lucy waited quietly. Her face showed concern but not judgment. Began to talk, She told Lucy everything. She told her about the dynasty and their wealth that stretched across 3 galactic sectors. She told her about the parties and the flattery and the endless calculations of everyone around her. She told her about the hollow feeling that had grown inside her until she could not bear it anymore. She told her about the experiment. She told her how she had traveled to Earth disguised as a refugee to see if genuine kindness existed anywhere in the galaxy. She told her how she had been ignored and exploited and had nearly given up hope. And then she told Lucy what happened next. She told her how a tired cargo worker had sat down on a bench and shared her sandwich with a stranger for no reason except that the stranger looked hungry. She told her how that simple act had changed everything she thought she knew about the universe. When finished speaking, silence hung between them. She could not look at Lucy's face. She was afraid of what she would see there. Lucy was quiet for a long moment, then she laughed. It was a soft laugh, not mocking or bitter. It sounded almost fond. Lucy said that explained a lot of things. She said she had always wondered why held sandwiches like she had never seen one before. She said she had noticed how sometimes used words that seemed too formal for a refugee from a border conflict. Finally looked up. She searched Lucy's face for anger or betrayal. She found neither. She apologized. She said she understood if Lucy felt used. She said their friendship had been the only real thing she had ever experienced, but she knew that did not excuse the lie. Lucy considered this for a while. She asked what had learned from her experiment. Said she had learned that genuine kindness existed. She said she had found it in the most unlikely place, not among the wealthy and powerful who claimed to admire her, but in a cargo worker who earned less in a year than's family spent on a single party. Lucy nodded slowly. She said that was a good thing to learn. She asked what plan to do with that knowledge. The question struck deeply. She had not thought that far ahead. She had been so focused on the experiment and then on her guilt that she had not considered what came next. She could return to her old life. Her family would welcome her back. The parties would continue. The flattery would resume. Nothing would have changed except her understanding of how empty it all was. But how could she go back now? How could she sit in ballrooms surrounded by calculated smiles when she knew what real friendship felt like? She looked at Lucy and made a decision. She said her family's company needed oversight on their shipping practices in human sectors. Humanity was new to galactic commerce, and many companies took advantage of them. She said she wanted to change that, at least within her family's business. She said she needed someone who understood human values and human culture, someone she trusted completely. She offered Lucy a position. Not charity, she insisted. Real work with real authority and fair compensation. Lucy would help ensure that humans were treated fairly in all dealings with the dynasty. Lucy was quiet for a long time. She said she was not interested in charity. She said she had earned everything she had through hard work. Said this was not charity. She said Lucy was the most qualified person she had ever met. She said no amount of money could buy the integrity and compassion that Lucy possessed naturally. Lucy thought about it. She asked about her brother and whether she could still help pay for his education. Said of course, the position would pay far more than Lucy earned now. She could help her brother and save for her own future too. Lucy smiled. She said she would think about it, but could see in her eyes that she had already decided. 3 months later, stood in a grand hall at a trade summit. Delegates from dozens of species filled the room, discussing shipping contracts and trade agreements worth billions of credits. Her family's banner hung from the walls. Beside her stood Lucy Grant, dressed in professional attire that still somehow looked comfortable and practical. The other delegates whispered to each other, confused by the human woman who spoke with such quiet authority. They did not understand how a cargo worker from an unknown human city could command such respect from the air. Watched her friend navigate the room. Lucy greeted wealthy merchants and powerful ambassadors with the same easy warmth she had shown a hungry stranger on a transit station bench. She did not treat them differently because of their status. She simply treated everyone well. A delegate approached and asked about her human associate. He asked where Lucy had trained and what prestigious academy had produced her. Smiled. She said Lucy had trained in the cargo bays of a transit station and on the streets of a small town in Minnesota. She said Lucy's education came from a lifetime of treating every person with dignity regardless of their wealth or status. The delegate looked confused and walked away. Did not mind. She had stopped caring what people like him thought long ago. She had traveled across the galaxy searching for proof that genuine kindness existed. She had found it in the most unlikely place. And now, she was going to spend the rest of her life making sure that kindness spread as far as her family's influence could reach. She looked at Lucy and felt something she had never experienced in the hollow ballrooms of her. She felt at home,